For centuries, the Crusades have captivated and confused historians. Were they a necessary defense of Christendom or a reckless act of aggression? This video examines the controversial legacy of the Crusades and unveils the hidden stories behind this pivotal period. The Crusades often get brushed off as just a chapter of violent religious intolerance, right? You know, that dark period when fanatical Europeans took over the land of Jesus Christ from Muslim rulers without any provocation. Sure, the Christian soldiers who captured Jerusalem in 1099 did so after a brutal slaughter of its Jewish and Muslim populations, but the story of the Crusades is way more complicated than just religious hatred. Let's dive a bit deeper into this, shall we? It's important to understand that the motivations behind the Crusades were mixed, involving political, economic, and social factors, not just pure fanaticism. There were layers of intrigue, alliances, and rivalries that shaped this historical moment. So, what really went down during those times? We'll explore the key events, the major players involved, and the impact these conflicts had on both the Christian and Muslim worlds. It's a wild ride through history that's often oversimplified. Stick around as we tackle some of the most puzzling questions about the Crusades. Trust me, it's going to be an eye-opening journey. The Crusades didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They have deep roots tied to long-standing tensions over control of holy places. It's pretty fascinating when you think about it, right? These tensions involve two of the three major world religions we know today. By the 11th century, Islam was making waves across North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire, which was Christian, was getting pushed back into the eastern Mediterranean by the rising power of the Muslim Seljuk Turks. Things took a dramatic turn in 1071, during the Battle of Manzikert, where the Byzantines faced a crushing defeat. This loss allowed the Turks to grab a huge chunk of Anatolia and put the remaining eastern provinces in serious jeopardy. Feeling the heat and facing possible destruction, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos reached out to Pope Gregory VII in the west for help against the Turks. And guess what? Gregory passed on Alexios' urgent plea to the next pope, Urban II, who saw this as a chance to do something truly extraordinary. In 1095, Pope Urban II called together church leaders at the Council of Clermont, and let me tell you, it was a big deal. He was there to tackle a serious request from Alexios, the Byzantine emperor. Urban stood up and delivered a passionate speech that really fired up the crowd, urging European Christians to take action. He wanted them to help free the Holy Land from Muslim control and lend a hand to the struggling Byzantines. He didn't hold back either. Urban passionately pointed out the dire situation, saying, "I want you to know that the land of the East has been seized by the wicked sect of the Persians. And not just that, but the city of Jerusalem and all the surrounding areas have fallen into their hands." Can you imagine the atmosphere in that room? He called on the French and German princes who were there, asking them to rally their armies and come to the aid of Eastern Christians. And here's the kicker. By doing this, they would get a free pass on their sins. Pretty tempting, right? And just like that, the First Crusade was set in motion. It was a moment that changed history and kicked off a series of events that would shape the future for centuries to come. The Crusades brought together a mix of participants, and it's pretty fascinating when you dig into it. So, the First Crusade kicked off with armies of European Christians marching eastward in a big way. While many people think of the Crusaders as mostly European or French, the truth is, it was a whole lot more diverse than that. After Urban II fired everyone up with his passionate speech at Clermont, folks from all over Europe, even from places like Ireland and England, answered the call to arms. When the Crusaders hit Constantinople in 1096, they realized they weren't flying solo. Alexios the Byzantine emperor was ready to lend a hand and had gathered his own army. He was all about teamwork, but let's be real, he expected the Crusaders to do most of the heavy lifting. Now, if you're wondering about numbers, estimates suggest there were between 30,000 to 60,000 soldiers involved in the First Crusade. Out of that, around 20,000 were European, while the rest were Byzantine troops. And it wasn't just foot soldiers leading the charge. Knights played a super important role in medieval warfare, and many noble houses sent their best and brightest into battle. Counts from places like Flanders, Maine Vermandois, and Toulouse all sent groups of knights to join the fray. All in all, it's estimated that about 8,000 knights participated in the First Crusade. Quite the mix, right? What went down during the Crusades? It's pretty wild, honestly. Instead of one big army, The First Crusade was a mix of smaller groups, taking different paths through some seriously hostile territory. One of the most famous figures from this time was Peter the Hermit. He led a ragtag crew of European peasants on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Can you believe their numbers swelled to about 40,000? But here's the catch: they were totally unprepared and faced brutal starvation and disease along the way. Sadly, many didn't even make it to the Byzantine capital, and those who did were no match for the Seljuk Turks, getting completely crushed at the Battle of Dorylaeum. Meanwhile, the main force of the crusade, led by notable figures like Raymond of St. Gilles, cruised through southern Italy, with the Norman King Roger I having their backs. When they finally reached Constantinople, Alexios welcomed them into his empire, letting them set up camp right outside the city walls. Quite the adventure, right? Running low on supplies, the Crusaders started getting a bit restless, right? They ended up seizing several Byzantine churches, monasteries, and even villages. When Alexios caught wind of this, he wasn't having it. He threatened to kick them out of Constantinople unless they apologized and covered the damages. After a bit of back and forth, the Crusaders finally made amends and were allowed to continue their journey eastward. Once they hit Anatolia, things got tough. The rugged terrain and the scorching summer heat were no joke, but they didn't let that stop them. They pushed forward, and soon enough, they found themselves face to face with the enemy. On June 19, 1097, they clashed with the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Dorylaeum. Even though they were outnumbered, the Crusaders pulled off a win thanks to their superior European armor and weapon. It was a fierce fight, but they managed to come out on top. Still, it wasn't without its costs. Both sides ended up withdrawing after the battle, a testament to the heavy toll it took on everyone involved. Winter in 1097–98 was quite a time for the Crusaders as they camped near Nice. They weren't just sitting around though. They were out there pillaging the countryside and causing quite a bit of trouble for the Byzantine forces. Can you imagine the chaos? Come spring of 1098, the Crusaders were all geared up for their final push to Jerusalem. They wasted no time and captured Antioch in June, which was a huge win for them. Talk about a game changer. By April of 1099, they laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. It wasn't an easy journey though. They faced months of hardship and famine, but after all that struggle, the city finally fell in July, and the Crusaders burst through the gates. What happened next was brutal. They stormed the city, and in a shocking turn of events, they slaughtered the Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, claiming Jerusalem as their own. It's a dark chapter in history, showing just how fierce the battle for this city was. What did the Crusades really bring to the table? Well, the Crusaders set up 4 key states in the Levant: the county of Tripoli, the county of Edessa, the kingdom of Jerusalem, and the principality of Antioch. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the kicker: these states were always on shaky ground, constantly threatened by nearby Muslim rulers. Fast forward a bit, and you'll see that the next couple of centuries were filled with conflict as the Crusaders fought tooth and nail to keep their grip on these territories. Take the Second Crusade, for instance. Launched in 1147, it aimed to save the city of Edessa after it fell to the Zengid dynasty. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. Then came the Third Crusade in the 1180s, which was all about reclaiming Jerusalem after Saladin took it over. But guess what? It didn't achieve much besides a treaty that let European Christians visit Jerusalem as not exactly a victory parade. And let's not forget the Fourth Crusade, which was a total mess. In 1204, the Crusaders ended up sacking Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, looting the city, and hauling off treasures back to Europe. After that, there were a few half-hearted attempts to recapture Jerusalem, but the Muslim rulers were just too strong, and those efforts fizzled out. The Crusades were a wild ride, right? Even with all the bloodshed and chaos, they weren't a complete flop. Some historians actually think they set the stage for the European Renaissance. How? Well, they introduced Western scholars to all those amazing Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in the East. Pretty cool, huh? Then there's the whole deal with European contact with Muslim culture. It wasn't just about battles, it was also about science, philosophy, and art. This exchange really jazzed up European culture and sparked creativity like never before. And let's not forget how the Crusades played a part in shaping European nations. Kings had to raise big armies, which meant they needed to get their act together. Plus, ambitious nobles found a way to channel their energy into something more productive than just bickering among themselves. Last but definitely not least, the Crusades kicked off a trade boom between Europe and the Middle East. They set up trading posts and encouraged brave merchants to take the plunge and make that risky journey east. Talk about opening doors. Why do the Crusades still matter today? It's a question that often pops up after watching films like Kingdom of Heaven. Seriously, can you imagine people going to such crazy lengths just to grab a piece of land thousands of miles away? For European Christians back in the day, the answer was pretty straightforward. Jerusalem was the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and they believed it was their duty to reclaim it from Muslim control, no matter what it took. But when you look at it from a modern angle, that reasoning feels a bit off, right? Some critics have pointed out that the Crusades were a costly venture, really costly, and in the end, it was pretty much a lost cause. Why would these folks risk their lives and pour so much money into something that seems so futile? It's a wild thought, isn't it? The passion and determination behind those actions can leave you scratching your head, trying to figure out what drove them to take such extreme measures. Understanding the Crusades really requires us to look at the bigger picture. Picture this. Between 1095 and 1291, Europe was just starting to shake off the cobwebs of the Dark Ages. The Byzantine Empire was a major player in the Mediterranean, but things were starting to go south for them. By the late Middle Ages, they were losing ground to the rising Seljuk Turks, and that's where the Crusades come into play. So, why did Western European nations jump in? Well, they wanted to help the Byzantines reclaim their lost territories. It's kinda like when your friend is in a tough spot and you want to lend a hand, right? But this wasn't the first time European powers got involved in another state's business. Take the 30 Years' War. For instance, nations were scrambling to keep the balance of power in Central Europe. Fast forward to the Cold War, and you've got the US and the Soviet Union backing different armies to extend their influence. It's all about interests, you know. The Crusades fit right into this pattern. Just like those other historical moments, the motivations behind the Crusades were about more than just noble causes. They were deeply tied to the self-interests of the powers involved. The Crusades weren't just about religious intolerance. Historian Stephen Runciman really digs into this in his book A History of the Crusades. When European Christians took Jerusalem in 1099, they weren't exactly saints. Most of them were just rough-and-tumble soldiers who didn't really care much about theology. But here's the twist. There were actually plenty of moments of cooperation and coexistence between European Christians and Muslim rulers in the Levant. Can you believe that? Take Saladin, for example. During his reign, he allowed European Christians to travel to Jerusalem as pilgrims. That's pretty remarkable, right? And let's not forget about Queen Isabella of England. When she visited the Holy Land in 1189, she was actually hosted by Saladin himself. It's wild to think about how these different cultures interacted back then. What's the real story behind the Crusades? A lot of folks see them as this dark time in history, right? You know, when European Christians went on this wild rampage through the Middle East, burning cities and causing chaos. But hang on, it's way more complicated than that. First off, the Crusades were driven by a mix of reasons. Politics, economics, and culture all played a role. It wasn't just about religious intolerance. Can you believe that? There were actually moments of cooperation and coexistence between European Christians and Muslim rulers in the Levant. Isn't it interesting how history isn't just black and white? There were alliances and interactions that showed a different side of the story. So, next time you think about the Crusades, remember, it's not just about the battles and bloodshed. It's a rich tapestry of human experience, filled with complexities that challenge our simple narratives. History really is fascinating, don't you think? The Crusades are such a captivating topic, right? They spark all kinds of opinions across the globe. Some folks see them as a necessary defense for Christendom, while others think they were just plain aggressive. But no matter where you stand, one thing's for sure. The Crusades had a massive impact on history. First off, they really set the stage for the European Renaissance. Can you believe it? By introducing Western scholars to classical and Islamic texts, they opened up a whole new world of knowledge and ideas. It's like a light bulb went off, leading to all sorts of advancements. Then, there's the whole nation-state thing. The Crusades pushed European kings to raise big armies, which was a gift. Plus, they gave ambitious nobles a way to channel their energy and ambitions. Talk about shaking things up. And let's not forget about trade. The Crusades established trading posts and got merchants excited about venturing into the East. This connection between Europe and the Middle East really kicked off a whole new era of commerce. Isn't it fascinating how one event can ripple through time like that? Looking back at the Crusades, it's clear they were more than just a battle of swords and shields. They were really a clash of civilizations, you know. And let's not forget, the folks who took part in these events weren't monsters. They were human beings, just like us. They were driven by a mix of good and evil, courage and cowardice, faith and doubt. It's kind of wild when you think about it. Now, these crusades are part of our shared history, and we have the power to decide how we remember them. Do we want to see them as just a time of bloodshed and intolerance? Or can we look at them as a moment when people from different cultures and religions came together and created something new and beautiful? The choice is really ours, right? Let's choose to remember the potential for connection and understanding, rather than just the conflict. That's a legacy worth embracing. If you had a good time watching this, why not give that like button a little love? It really helps out. And hey, if you want to keep the good vibes rolling, make sure to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Don't forget to check out my earlier videos too. There are some really cool dives into history and current events that you might find super interesting. Thanks a bunch for tuning in. I can't wait to catch you in the next one.